All right. Welcome, everyone. We have a bit of a crowd today. Let's give it a couple of more minutes. There's plenty of new faces. Good to have you, everyone, here. Chat is open, so feel free to drop in any of your questions over there. And I will start addressing it from there. So don't use the QA. Chat should just work for everyone. Okay. I want to start with a couple of questions. Welcome, everyone. Hey, Mark. Hey, Paul. I wanted to start with a couple of questions, right? So since we are here, we want to scale content creation process in some meaningful way, right? That doesn't get penalized by Google, or we're just publishing a bunch of crap online. We don't want to be doing that. So we want to set up a process, whether we are using it just as a one-man show, or we're using as a team, or in an agency environment, right? Like there's could be various different things. So would love to just take a few, understand how you guys are thinking of scaling process. Do you work in an agency? Are you trying to scale the process in your agency, whether small or big? Are you working in an organization where you're sort of leading and you have internal stakeholders who write content for you? Or you are a one-man show, that's great too. You're a niche site builder and you're trying to find ways to scale the content, that's okay as well. All three use cases, right? So I want to understand where you guys are. So just kind of long run and gunner. I work with two people who create content, that's great. I have tons of people here. I'm sure everyone's looking to create content or at least put some speed to it, right? Great. Denny's a solo. A few more here. I see some agencies here, speed, indeed, and quality. Great. Well, that's exactly what one-man show, besides writing freelance SEO, content writing, I'm building local websites. Great. Freelancer, great. Create content for clients. So agency, right? Like an agency sort of a setting, which is great. All right. So most of you here are small to I mean, entrepreneur, small agency or bigger agency. Some of you who are shy might as well be working in other companies. So we'll look at all of these use case, and I want to make this session as useful as possible so you can actually take the material that I'm about to present and turn it into your own, right? See if you can build a process for using that as a benchmark and modify it to your process. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Let me turn on my slide. Presenters view. Okay, all right. And here we go. Share screen. Okay, so in this webinar, we're going to see how and what sort of things we need, right, in order to scale content creation process. And whenever you're thinking about doing anything, right, like what's the ROI in it, right? Like whether the money, the time, and the energy that you're spending into creating this content, is it even worthwhile? What is it going to actually do for you in long run, right? Like, I mean, I just don't want to be sitting around and creating content day in and out, knowing or not knowing that it might even bring $100 for me, right? Like, so I don't know that. So you want to think of scaling content creation process with the right balance of the effort, time, money, everything that goes behind it in creating this content, as well as what's the throughput or the output you're going to get from it, right? Like what is the long-term ROI of this content? So you can scale and you can push out tons of content, and some might stick and some might not, and you can keep doing that. But it's not sustainable because you're constantly going to have to write content in order for search engines to recognize this. And if they don't stick around in top positions, then there is no long-term ROI in it. So you want to balance that out. So a quick quickly, what outranking is an AI-powered content writing and optimization platform, and we help with the entire journey of writing content, optimizing it, and creating a process around creating a process with the AI at the center of it, of a traditional writing process, a traditional SEO process. Okay, so why you might want to build a scalable process? And there's quite a few reasons, right? Like, but these are the five top top reasons that I could think of. And the first one is quality control. Like, so if I have I want to build a scalable process, one of the core things or one of the core issues that you are going to face is quality control, because you're writing tons and tons of content. Oversight on everything that you create is impossible. So if you're thinking about scaling process, you're thinking about quality control. If you're thinking about scaling process, then you're also thinking about saving dollars, right? Like, okay, anybody with tons of money can go out and create so much content. You can hire an agency and they can do that for you if money wasn't without a bound. But despite of spending all that money, you want to see whether it's bringing in efforts or not. I mean, whether it's bringing in clicks, and if it is bringing clicks, then and you're a solo worker, you're working on a niche website, is it translating into affiliate revenue or ads revenue? Or if you are a business, is it turning into some conversions, right? Like, I mean, you could take an industry benchmark and say whether this many amount of people coming to a website converts into so and so many people, or you can have a better attribution tracking for the ways that people are interacting with your content. But you want some sort of ROI from it, right? You don't want to throw 4 people their time and money behind a content that might not rank, and even if it does, it's poorly positioned. And if it's poorly positioned, it's dying out eventually, right? Like, so you don't want to be doing that. When the third thing that would come to your mind, right, like when you're trying to build a scalable process, is brand alignment. Like, that's one of the biggest concerns that we have, right? If you're trying to build a content process around AI, and now majority of the thinking, like before, what we used to do is give a brief to the writer, and when the writer has a brief, they would go and kind of find the information themselves and dig into this and add and enrich the content. Now, with significant reliance on AI, many of just want to bypass that altogether. So you're constantly going to face this, even if you put this into your guidelines and say that, hey, don't use any AI, or use the AI in the right way, or use AI to do certain tasks, right? Like, all of that will solely fall into the writer's place, and you might not have control over it. And especially when it comes to brand alignment, what happens is the new writer that you hire, if you're trying to scale the process, might not be brand aware, right? And if they are not, then you have to reinvent the process of brand alignment every time a new piece comes in, right? You need someone or an owner to be looking after that brand information that's going into the content, right? You just don't want to be spitting out garbage, or things that will not resonate with your brand, right? And let's look at the fourth. The fourth one is actually very, very, very important, which is ownership. If you're creating content yourself, you are the owner, and you are going to have to do all of these things together. But in a team environment where you have an SEO who's creating a brief, you have a writer, or a researcher. I would say now researcher is more important than writer, because anybody can write content with tons of other tools. So that person they and the editor, and then the publisher also, right? Like, they know exactly what they're supposed to do at what stage of the journey of the content they're supposed to be pushing it forward, and pushing it to the finish line, right? If there's no ownership, if they don't know what they're doing, and how is the quality judged by from your perspective, this is all going to fall loose, right? So you want to have ownership. And lastly, hands-off process, right? Like, because you have ownership, you can have a handoff process. So scaling content, like, understand, like, a person has only 2 hands, right? And no matter how fast you type, you still have limited amount of time. And sometimes scaling means that getting a team involved, and what one person was doing at a speed of 10 topics a day could now, that's exaggerating, right? Like you can't write 10 topics a day by a single person, but hypothetically speaking, if you're doing one right now, you can do two at the speed, like, two article per person kind of thing. So you're increasing the speed. And if you're a single person as well, right? And if you have this process noted down, or at least you have a workflow in place, then what will happen is that your just process will naturally become so much easier. You'd be in so much control over everything that you're doing with that piece and not getting sidetracked. So for anyone, right, like this is going to be super important. Now, let's come down a little bit and understand what personas you're going to be playing, right? Or whether you're a single person, you're going to be playing with all of these personas. If you have a team, then many people might be playing these personas, right? And there could be a few more that you might add over here. So an SEO is going to be obviously the first one, right? You're going to start with a topic. So you need someone to go and kind of do the headings, the outlines, the brief, right, before you hand it off to the next person. Then comes a VA writer or a subject matter expert. And you can divide them into multiple segments, but right, like I'm grouping them together is because they're essentially doing some of the other things that one of the other person would do, right? The first one is VA, and the reason why I'm saying a VA is because now a researcher's job is even more important than a writer's job, considering the current landscape where AI can write, and it can write well, it can write well and lie, and nobody can tell about it, right? So a researcher's role is increasingly important now if you want to scale content. The reason why I'm saying this is because quality, you cannot still compromise on quality. If you are using only AI, then you're going to face that quality problems, right? So I'm dividing it into VA because when sometimes you have academic researchers or academic research VA, you can look up this specific roles on Upwork or anywhere you are working, right? But when you do that, you will find you'll find very, very, very narrow set of audience or narrow set of skilled people who will be able to research the crap out, like the living crap out of a topic that you give them, provided you have given them enough guidelines, right? So that's one. Well, the same role can be done by a writer, right? Much better if they follow all the VA directions or the academic researching directions, and are able to also write better or understand other AI tools and incorporate them better into the writing style. Then the later part becomes a little easier, which then goes to the editor. A subject matter expert, I say it because many times, right, like SEOs can narrate this, but how you're going to be writing this is going to significantly change based on expert to expert, right? Like, so in the previous organization I was working in, and we were trying to scale process around technical writing, and this is like bunch of scripts and bunch of topics which are very technical of nature, and you cannot hire a VA or a writer to do this for you. So you need internal subject matter expertise to build this content out. And so what you need to identify these people, right? Like you need to understand what will motivate them and how you can build a process around them as well, so that you're not overly dictating their subject matter expertise, but you're also kind of telling them what will lead to the right kind of results, because they're putting in their time. Editor, obviously, and in many cases, right, like even when you have a small agency, there is some sort of quality control. For companies, it might just be subject matter expert who do the review, and then it goes to maybe the content marketing expert, right, that they do an editorial review. But there's going to be some sort of review that you have to do no matter what, whether you're doing it alone, in a team environment, in an agency environment. An editor is always at the center of this, right? Now you can play that role as well, but an editor, absolutely essential part of this. And I'm saying that because this entire pillar will revolve around how good you have your editorial process set up. And if you have a great editorial process set up, the person knows exactly what your brand is about, then you would remove so many bottlenecks from scaling the process. So hence I'm saying editorial. If you're doing this yourself, then consider this to be, you doing the job of correcting spellings, making sure that AI isn't using some slangs like, you don't want it to use, or things of that nature, right? But you're going to have to play that role. Lastly, I call it a publisher because we're doing SEO writing. We're publishing it on the web, right? Everything matters. Everything matters, as in whether the title went in correctly, the description went in correctly, whether the no follow, do follow tags or the all tags went in correctly, the images are sized properly, right? Like all of these things, and it depends on the CMS you are using, depends on the process that you're using, is going to be significantly different. And let's say if you're just using WordPress, right, which is mostly used by everyone, even then, the no follow, do follow, all tags, right? And sometimes you're using custom styling. So all of those things, you need to factor it in because they're all going to add up to time and money, whether you're doing it yourself or someone else is doing it for you. So makes sense. Grammarly is a reasonable editor for all of us, but Grammarly will not pick up the typos in all tags. Grammarly might not be able to understand whether the internal links linked by the writers are currently, correctly laid out, or there are many things that's possible that might not be fitted into Grammarly, and it really depends on the process that you have, right? Like how much heavy lifting the person who's sitting behind the Grammarly is doing it themselves, right? Like so all of that comes into a good editorial process and having those guidelines laid out so everyone knows exactly what they're doing. We'll get to that, right? Like, so you can adjust these things as you'd like, but I want to give you like this is a benchmark. And the reason why I'm giving this a benchmark is because every effort that whether you are doing it yourself or someone else is doing it for you, you want to ensure that there's an ROI behind it, right? So realistically speaking, how much time are you going to be spending in creating a blog post, a great blog post, right? We're not talking about using some writer to generate 100 blog posts given a keyword. No. Those are not what we're talking about. We're talking about carefully thought out content, right? Created with assistance of AI. Well, not even AI, right? Like let's say just traditionally a process, you have some chat GPT tool or whatever that tool that you're using. Even when then you're using it, you understand that this some of these things are not negotiable. Absolutely not. Outline, I mean, are you gonna spend 1 minute on it? I don't think so. 10 minutes, it's going to take 10 minutes, right? At least, right? Even if you're expert, any of the platforms, even if you're in outranking expert, right? We'll generate the outline for you. But you're still going to go and check cross-validate it against the SERPs, right? You're still going to edit it and all of that. So I'm factoring in maybe 10 minutes, right? Or maybe a little more, depending on how thorough you are or your writing preference, right? Then optimization, it's going to take 60 minutes if you do it with yourself, right? Like you are controlling every parameter, you're going and adding those keywords, those concepts that were left out when you wrote the content or when the first draft was generated or whatever that is, right? You're still doing many of those optimizations yourself. And if you're using outranking, you're going to significantly reduce that time. But just a ballpark, right? Like you're spending this much time in optimizing, whether you say yes or no, right? Like I know it. Like if you're going to optimize every element, title, description, outlines, I can get it done very fast. Internal linking with some help, very fast. Like even that will add up to 10-15 minutes. And then you go into the common terms and you have a problem because when you're talking about, let's say, a recent Google update and you want to talk about Hummingbird, you don't know what you should be talking about Hummingbird. So you're going to go back and research something to include Hummingbird in it and find some content or concept related to it and then include it, right? Like all of that will take time. And that can significantly add up to the cost. Even if you're not considering it into the dollar exact value cost, if you're doing it yourself, it's still adding up to time and cost. Research and writing. Now, let's say a first draft is great. And for many topics where there is very thin content out there, it's not created well content out there, right? Like with minimal amount of writing or research, you're okay. But let's assume, right, with many of the niches will get more competitive very fast with people driving this AI train, right? Understand that you're going to need more and more research in order for your content to be great content. And we'll talk about that in the later, right? Like what does great research entail? And how can you guide your writers or VAs in order to do great research? But this is mandatory. 4 or 5 hours of research. Let's say, let's pick out 20 sections. And even if you are spending 5 minutes per section, you can understand how much time it would take to go and find those information and add it to your blog, and then write on top of that. So 3 minutes is less. 300 minutes is less, right? Like, uh, 5 hours is nothing behind going behind doing some real fact checking, some collecting some great sources, adding some great screenshots, and all of those things above and beyond, right? Then comes the editorial part. Well, I've noticed, right? Like every time I go and just do it in Grammarly, I tend to go and click accept on many of the things so fast and get so reliant on that I start missing out the point that sometimes it could be totally absurd and wrong in suggesting some of the suggestions, right? So these are the great things that an editorial process can capture. If you have written it down, that fine, go use the Grammarly tool. Whether you're doing it internally, that's fine, but look out for this problems that you might face with Grammarly. And if those expectations are clear, then you've mitigated the risk of not happening this when your content is going through the publishing cycle. So it all comes down to how well you are actually curating this. And even if you generate this with first draft, I'll show you how it can be literally like fall apart, right? Like, so you can generate a topic with ChatGPT and say that, I'm done with researching and writing, but that's not the case I'm talking about. And we'll go through that process at the end. Okay, then comes the publishing part. This might be 30 minutes so I'm taking, right? Like you exported, imported the content. That takes maybe another 5 minutes or so. But then you start reviewing things, right? Like adding alt tags if they are missed out. And there we go. Sorry about that. Those alt tags were missed out and things of that nature, right? Like you might be looking at 30 minutes of publishing because you're gonna WordPress, you click publish, it takes about a few seconds, just for the changes to apply, and then you open up the page and go come back, that's gonna take 10 minutes. So understand, right? Like those little minute, a few minutes here and there adds up to a significant time when you consider the entire cycle of publishing your content can take approximately 10 hours of 10 hours of combination of time. And even if you're at like just $25, which is still less, right? Like moving towards 40, 50 now for grade. And if you're doing this yourself, you can understand, you just multiply that by twice. And you might say that, okay, $500 is what's going to cost my time in writing one of these blog pieces. No matter what country you're from, doesn't really matter, right? Like value, this is how much time it's going to take. And if you are a little more thorough, or you add more details depending on the topics, you might even go to $15 hours, right? And then you can adjust this cost and understand, okay, this is how much it's costing me to generate my content. And even if I generate this with AI, and let's say I did it in 1 hour, and my cost was just 50 to $100, but ROI is zero, then you still did not win, right? So we want to win. And the way you win is you write quality content, helpful content, people first content. And for that, 10 hours is nothing. 10 hours is what someone would expect to, kind of use this. So now, like, okay, we have 10 hours. How do we reduce this, right? Like, what can we do in order to reduce this? So strategically thinking about this entire process and breaking it out into all the things that would consume more time. Let's break it out, right? So the first thing is, if your qualities of the first draft are great, and they're a great starting point for the writers or for the researchers to start working on, and that would reduce a significant amount of time, right? Like just getting the foundation laid out, a few sentences here and there, understanding the basic nature of the content flow and what you want to write about takes time, right? So if you're doing this manually and you did this with a first draft, and you did this with a quality tool, right? Like you can significantly reduce the amount of time that it is taking you to generate the content, or at least write the content. Now, process of researching. Now, this is great, right? Like, so AI can read through your content and suggest ways of improving it or enriching it for people first, right? Like, or user experience. If you're using some of that and you're using this in combination with some great AI tools, right, you can significantly even reduce the amount of time on researching, because the amount of time on researching is not actually going and sourcing the information, but it is figuring out what to source to start with. So what to source. If you have some inspirations or you have some great ideas, concrete ideas on what information should someone go and source, then sourcing is no brainer. You don't need to teach anybody how to go and use Google, right? You can, but provided you know what queries to type into Google. If that is the case, then you are all set. Third is the process of writing, actually, right? Like, how is your writer or your whoever is actually writing the content approaching to the process altogether, right? Whether I mean, some say that, I'd like to go and go section at a time, generate one section at a time, and make sure that it's perfect before I move on to the next section, or I just like to generate the entire complete first draft, right? Like, whatever suits you. But you have to consider speed as well as quality at the center of it, and see which one will get you the most, right? Whether you writing one section at a time with AI or without AI is giving you better content, more resonating content, and the amount of time you're spending in it is going to be worthwhile in bringing those leads or keeping those people a little longer or helping you rank in Google, then it's be all worth it. But judge that out, right? And see which battles you are to win, and only try to win the ones which will bring you the biggest impact. Okay, faster optimization. You can either enable the writers to leverage AI as much as possible, cut the time in optimization, right? Or you could have an SEO person going through this and reviewing it. In my experience, right, like with the tools, right, like outranking, you can do this. You can do this hands off. You can even teach a VA to run this automatic optimization, because we have an editorial process. If you have an editorial process, then no matter what you do, and if you go through that editorial process, you'd capture anything that wasn't supposed to be there. And hence that, that portion is very significant. But you can do that. Then setting expectations correctly. So I've seen many times people, get stuck on, people get stuck on the amount of score that they need to achieve on a particular content, or hitting every top buttons, right? Like, well, that's not the goal. The goal is to, yes, create better content than your competition by scoring more in outranking or any tools that you use. But the core is still people first, right? You still need to see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And what obviously doesn't make sense to you, don't dwell around it. Start moving it. So having the right expectation sets from your team members, as well as what you expect from the content, is going to greatly help you do optimization, right? Just don't get stuck on every little detail, but instead get stuck on the things that which are the most important, and make sure that you do them correctly, and not dwell on the remaining. And then let me finish through the slides, and I have a few questions. We'll start taking that as well before we jump into the next slide. Then the last thing that where you can save money is better hands-off writer, right? Like hands-off from writers, handoffs from writers, right? So what that really means is that if the content written by writer or curated by VA or whoever that initial person is before it comes to editorial is very well versed, has done their job very correctly, then the editorial process is going to be reduced quite a bit, right? And that saves a lot of money. Now, editors usually are more expensive, right? And that's where the most expensive part is. So even if you reduce 20 to 30 minutes of that time, that can translate into a big amount of money, right? Like, and that can help you scale process, because now the same editor can do twice as much work in half as much time, right? So having a process around that will greatly help. And the last thing, but not the least, if you're writing for a brand, not all writers, because if you're sourcing writers from various places, right, or you're sourcing VAs, it really depends. And if things constantly keep changing, they might not be brand aware, which I have seen very likely to be the case, right? But editorial or the editors stick around longer, right? Like, you have one person in charge, gatekeeping. And what that means is that if they are brand aware and you have noted this out in your editorial process, then the time to finalizing the content and making sure that it's impactful, quality, and all of that will become significantly faster. So we have this 6 or 7 items, right, that we can improve or tweak and reduce the amount of time that we spend on creating content. And then we have a scalable process. So let's look at the next slide. Okay, so if we can have the right kind of first draft, well, let me stop right here and take a few questions before I go next. Travel related browse. Okay. Great stuff. All right. So Wes asked, in the research phase, I gather I rather identify the holes in the content I can fill instead of regenerating or merging other ideas. What is the most effective way for me to use outranking to find those gaps I can fill? And I will show you that exact process that I use to brief my writers, researchers, and editors and everyone. And we'll go through one process altogether, right? So you guys can have an idea of how fast this can be really. If you set the pedal, do all the right thing, then have your process noted down. Okay, so now let's look at this last slide, right? Before we'll get into actual demonstrations and see how things you can do yourself. How much can you really save, right? Like what you can totally save is like, look at this, right? First draft, right? You can reduce it by 60 minutes, right? If you have the correct type of tool. If you're using ChatGPT, I'm not saying that 60 minutes is going to be even viable. You're constantly iterating on the content and you're constantly dwelling around how perfect the content came out, right? And you're not more process driven, but you are a more hands-on driven, and that is not a scalable way of creating content, right? So it really depends on what tools you use, whether these tools are giving you good enough content as a benchmark that you can start working on it, massaging it, right? Like, is it giving you the details that you need to extend it? How much is the rewriting process around it, right? Like, all of those things are going to play a significant role in how fast you get there. But with the right tool you have, right, like, you can get those first draft and you can pretty much reduce 60 minutes, even if you're using from tool to tool, right? Like, this time might really vary depending on the process you've set up. So if you have a tool, build a process around that, and then you should be fine. If you don't have a tool, then build a process first, understand everything, and then get into the right tool, so you're not wasting your time and you have the right perfect match. Process of researching. Now, this is exactly what Wes was talking about, right? Like, if there was a way to bridge this gap by suggesting things, right, like, which will literally fill the gaps in the research, then there's nothing better than that. And if you are able to feed this information to a writer or a researcher or whoever that next person is in a very systematic way, I kid you not, knowing what to find is more difficult than going and finding it. So if you can suggest what to go and find and fill those gaps, then finding it becomes relatively easy. You can save a lot of time over here. Process of writing. If you have noted down the right steps, you brief the writers about the expectations of what you're trying to achieve with editorial guidelines and things of that nature, you can have a good process can literally save you tons of headache. And do this yourself. If you're doing this yourself in form of a process as well, scaling for you will become a lot more easier, because then you'd have a process that you can just hand over to someone. Enable the writers to leverage AI, right? Like reducing time by 30. So if they know how to use AI in a meaningful way, then that can save some time, right? So don't constrict your writers by saying that, hey, you just want to, you have to go and do this and not use AI or any of that nature. Like, they are going to do what they're going to do. But enabling them as to what your expectations are will ensure that no matter what they do, it'll still come back to you as the way you want it. Better hands off from writer, lesser editing. This is a game changer. That 30 minutes of your editorial time saving can lead to a significant amount of drop in the cost. So scaling about content, think about some of these things that I mentioned over here and build processes around that so that it really does what you want it to do. Okay, so now what you'll need to set up a process. And these are the 4 essential things we use to set up the process. Brand information, style guides for AI to follow, workflow setup, and editorial guidelines, right? We've identified our personas and we know exactly how we are going to proceed with the topics. Now we want to set it up. We want this 4 criteria to be laid out. First is brand information. You need to know exactly how your brand fits in, because you're writing format, you're writing to achieve something, ROI from your content, whether it's conversion, whether it's ads or whatever that is. And if it's just a niche site, right, that's okay. Your brand information can be a little all over the place, and I totally get it. But if you're writing for like a SaaS product or a brand, right, which many of you are trying to establish, then you need to have those expectations laid out yourself correctly, as to how they should be talking about it. Style guides for AI to follow, it's a very significant part. If you have a client that is writing 20, 30 topics a month, and they always use, let's say, a curse word every paragraph that you're writing content, building a style guide to allow you to do some of that can significantly reduce your burden, coming down to your writers, coming down to your editorial process as well. And then the reason I gave you an example is because I was talking to someone, and they have a client that does this on repeated nature, and they want the content to be written like that. So what I'm trying to get at is that a style guide can significantly reduce your time if you've invested time in it, right? But for many general use cases, if you're building a niche site, then you should be okay, because you don't have the brand information as deeply integrated into the content as much as some other folks. Workflow setup, knowing exactly how the content is going to move forward is a game changer. If you like, and many of you might have a Trello board or Asana board, right, or some CRMs that you might be using in order to manage this workflow management. But that is actually a game changer. Notifying the users of what is expected of them as the document moves the process can significantly give people the ownership, right? Like they know exactly what they need to do and when they need to do it. So having something and not mention just managing this in Excel sheet can greatly help as well. But hey, if you're working with an Excel sheet and you're a guru at that and you know how to automate it, blah blah blah, right? Like feel free to use Excel, but use some sort of workflow setup where you can move the topic from one place to other, and so exactly when it goes into the publishing, the publisher is notified, and then they know what to do with the topic. And setting up editorial guidelines. So we'll look at all of these things, and we're just like 20 minutes over here. So let's get started. Branding information. So I marked this, you can read this out. And this is my branding information for AI. And I'll show you how we have used this branding information in creating the content that we do currently. Read through it, right? The first part says what outranking does. And the last part says what outranking does not do. So it does not automatically take into the account of things that I've not mentioned. Why do I need this branding information? Is because I can use this branding information and I can personalize my style guide. So this is my outranking style guide. And you will see explicitly this is exactly what we are using in our existing process. So this is the tone, voice, how to use verbs, how to write comparison type sections. And many of these things are exactly the same in the default style guide with a few exceptions, right? Okay, my exception is this. I've added a breakdown into small passages, lists, or tables where possible. And I've added the brand information that we collected before. Why did I add the brand information into my style guide? Because if you see here, the last few sentences says where possible mention, oh, there's a typo here. Where possible mention, let's just delete this. Connections to outranking brand, and write 1 or 2 sentences. Don't force yourself if the content is not a good fit. The reason why I did this is because I don't want to be extensively talking about outranking in every topic or every educational type of content that we write, right? And when we are talking explicitly about product comparisons or alternatives or things of that nature, and outranking is a part of it, right? It will automatically also know what outranking does. But when I'm writing about informative content, let's say I'm writing about internal linking and how to build internal links. And I want to talk about this one feature that outranking has about automatic internal linking. And I want to talk about this automatically. So it's sort of ingested into the content when I'm writing it. And it can save the time of the editor in figuring out where to fit what type of content to fit in, and the writer from figuring out where do I source this information from, or how do I know what outranking does and how do I integrate this into it, right? So if I have this style guide, then what it will do is it will do all the default things which we've done, with an exception of going after a little different tone, talking about outranking, and writing the content a little slightly differently than it would do in normal use cases. And what I would do is I would just copy this and create a new style guide, right? And that's pretty much it. That's outranking style guide. You can have numerous style guides and for different clients, or or personas, or however you're picturing you're creating your content with more valuable. But you don't need a different style guide for listicles, for recipes, for things like that. You can create one style guide and talk about everything in one style guide altogether. It can understand up to 20, 30 parameters. So don't worry about extending your style guides, but instead make sure that your style guide is comprehensive for one client or one use case. Not listicles or recipes or things like that. You can still do it and make it even more specific, and it will absolutely work wonders, right? But then you need to have that noted down in your editorial process. So when whoever, if that's you, you know what style guide to pick when what type of topic comes, or someone else knows. And for agency settings, right, you can just pick a client from the drop down and you can add this and move further. All of these content that I am presenting right now will be available in the form of a blog later today. Also, this recording is available. It's going to be available as well. Okay, so this is the style guide. And we'll take more questions, right, around style guides once I'm done with the presentation. Absolutely. I want to quickly take one section over here. Okay. I would, Denny, I will get back to your question over there at the end, right? It's a little sidetracked from what I'm showing. So I'm not disregarding that. I'm going to get back to that question at the end. Okay. Let's go back and look at the next section. Okay. Workflow setup. Now, my workflow looks like this. So let's go through my outranking workflow. And here is what I was showing you, that I'll demonstrate how we are doing this at outranking, right? Okay, all right. So this is a brand new sprint that we just recently started. And we've done many sprints where things have gone all the way to publish, right? But I want to show you this very specific sprint that we've just started, and we're using a different approach. So what we have is not started means I've curated all my topics, and my process includes creating a first draft, which either I or someone at outranking will do. And then it goes to a VA. The VA does the research. And we build a process around, once the VA has done the research, right? Like they've been given a certain specific set of tools that they can use to polish the content really quickly and just send it to editing and skip the writing process. And we also have some great writers where we specifically assign those topics and where we want, some subject matter expertise from an SEO. We submit those type of topics to the writers, right? So we have a process around two things. One is a topic that can be, written with lesser expertise. One is the one that needs to be written with a little more expertise, right? So a white label SEO can be a general topic, can be, if researched well, anybody can write on it. And so can be the outsourcing one. But right, like what about backlink profile? You might want to understand a little bit of SEO before you can do this. Not saying a researcher cannot do it, but a writer can do a little slightly better job, right? Process still stays the same. What we do is, once a topic has not started, and we'll look at one of the topics, what to ask a sequence. Okay, so I'm just going to start one topic over here, and while it's doing it, we'll go through the entire process of getting it done. But these are the separations that we have laid out. Separations we have laid out, right? So first draft and brief is combined into one, and it really depends on what sort of process you have. I'll quickly show you how you can manage your processes as well. So go to workflow settings, and these are your workflows. The one you have eye on it are the ones you cannot delete, but you can enable or you can hide them. And you can add your own statuses, you can move them around, and kind of create that process which you have that will take you through the journey of publishing the content. And then once you have that, you can assign that to a team member. So I can edit, and I can assign them document statuses. That way, when a document is moved into that status, they're automatically notified. We're using this. Feel free to use your Trello board or any of those things to facilitate this particular part of it. Okay, now let's go back here. And this is just, I don't know why it does this automatically. Okay, so that's a workflow setup, right? Like once you have this, and look at the process that we currently have, look very closely at this, you'll see we've curated all the topics. I know exactly everything that I'm going to go after for this one particular sprint. And now it's just process of facilitating the process. And I don't have to constantly go and figure things out about what I want to write around, how I want to be creating content and all of that. If it is there, then I know exactly how to go further with it. Okay. And then the last was, style guides. For AI, we talked about that, but editorial guidelines, right? Like, so let's go ahead and look at the editorial guidelines. So these are the specific editorial guidelines that we have for researcher, VA, writers, and editors, right? And the editors sort of have the repeated guidelines because repeated guidelines with a few exceptions, right? We want the editors to be very much aware about what we told the writers as well as the researchers, so that they have an understanding of what could potentially come to them, and or what format the content would come to them, right? Like they have an exact idea of what they needs to be done. So now this is a process around what we've set up around outranking, and I will show you why this guidelines work very well with what outranking does at the current state, right? Like you can use this literally and guide anyone into creating really good content. So first thing first, right? Like fact check everything. I know outranking does the research and writes everything, but we still want the fact checking part. Sometimes, I mean, AI can lie, and when it's credibility, my credibility on the line, right? Like I am doing the byline of the article, I don't want to have something that is not fact checked, right? So this is specific. This is very important for me if I'm authoring the content. If I was still writing for a niche site, I would be lesser reluctant on this because we're still doing fact checking and we're gathering background details. But when it comes to a brand, right, like you might want to have a slightly adjusted attitude towards this. Source unique information and add more references, fact figures from different sources. Look for unique information to include in each section based on suggestions in boxes. And if you notice, we suggest everything, the image idea or the screenshot idea or any of those things that's suggested in brackets, or section or sections between this, right? Like sometimes it can also suggest in this. So we've added that. And then source information suggested under suggestions, relevant section mention the information explicitly. So we'll look at that, what that really means and why I'm saying some of these things, right? I want them to take the guidance that the AI is giving in terms of sourcing the information exact to exact and go and find that information and mention it somehow in the content in a specific format. Okay, then the media, we're talking about only screenshots allowed, right? Do not take screenshots of vector images. So we've noticed this issue as well, right? Like you tell someone to write content and they tell them to take screenshots, they'll take screenshots of vector images. We don't want vector images, right? So instead of that, put some of the content that you might see in those vector images as part of a table, right? Like if someone has created an infographic, you don't need to be writing or taking the screenshot of the exact infographic. Feel free to do that, but you can obviously take that content and put it into a table. Screenshots for demonstration, explanations, and examples only, right? Like we don't want screenshots of a meme, right? Like not that kind of screenshot. They're not more valuable. Content around media, mention content around media, adding sources, right? Like add the direct links of the sources, like literally direct, like a URL typed in the editor. Don't use hyperlinks. We do this so we have a clear understanding of what URLs we are going to be inserting as part of the internal linking. And the editor or whoever is the next person doesn't need to explicitly go and understand what this URL is by clicking on the hyperlink and then copying that, right? So this saves a little bit of time. Then adding sources. add direct links to the sources. That's what we just talked about. And then editing content. So for the research and VA, we explicitly tell them not to edit the content. Do not play the role of a writer, play the role of an academic researcher only. And you want to hire VA, if you are building this process out, then you want to hire someone who has keen for eye for like research, right? They can go and find information using these gaps that outranking is suggesting. Same thing goes for the writer, but writer has a little more duties to follow, right? Like they need to look into plagiarism, editing, and change the status once they are done, right? And I will show how you can change the status as well once we get there. For the editors, it's pretty much the same, but oversight of the writers and the content that comes from the researchers. Their job is to publish the content and keep the velocity, right? So and they need to verify whether those bare minimums have been optimized to 100% in outranking. So one of the most important roles that the editors play, which I kind of got at the end, but here it is: expertise of outranking and general SEO area, right? Like, so when we brief the editor, we give them all the videos of outranking that we want them to use, right? Obviously, they have direct access to outranking, and we send them a video of onboarding them, and they kind of understand how to use the tool and what the tool is used for, right? Like, if they have all of this information, then you can remove a significant amount of bottleneck from educating all your writers or educating all the stakeholders about the editorial process. But it's really up to you how you set up your process. You can adjust this guidelines and use it as a benchmark, extend it, decrease it, the amount of details you need to it, and go from there. So now let's go through a complete process of going and showing you this. Okay, so I'm going to pick a title, and the reason why I'm picking a title here, let's say, what to ask an SEO consultant. Okay, I'm just gonna mention this, right? Like, so I've not done any keyword, right? Like, we'll do this later on. It's an informative post. Let's go. I'm getting it to the point where I can hand this off to a researcher or a VA or a writer and ask them to start filling in the gaps. Absolutely, you can get the style guide. Also, there are many more examples of style guides, and I'll show you where. Okay, so let's say we have an outline, and obviously we can optimize this if we wanted to do this ourselves. I'm going to use a bit of AI to optimize some of these things and go further, right? So let's go do this ourselves. Okay, so we are targeting enough amount of headlines, so extending a headlines isn't going to be necessary, but I'm not using all the keywords that I'm supposed to be using, right? So we can do this later on, but you'd spend some time over here kind of streamlining your outline, the one that outranking has given you, add more, delete more, or whatever you want to do with it, and then move further, right? So now let's go to first draft. And use outranking as my first draft. And we'll start writing it, and then I'll show you how you can address the gaps. The point is to either, or see, there's problems when it writes very little, and there's a problem when it writes too much, right? So you want to write the right amount of content, and hence this tweaks that we've been making is to sort of give you enough value that you can use to massage the content, add more value on top of it, right? Like, go and find certain things which are important and enrich the content, but not solely rely on either of the factors. So it was going to take a couple of minutes. Or you could start dropping in your questions all together here while this draft is being generated. You got it, Mark. Have a good one. We preliminarily check our rankings on Google Search Console. I'm not too keen on monitoring every keyword, but there are some great rank trackers that you can use. Rank section provides valuable insights to identify pages as declining, quick wins. Denny, so you can do all of these things directly into the Search Console data. It's very easy to set up also some reporting with the Google Search Console, right? So do that over there. But what we changed in Strategist is to go towards things which will require a lot of time in order for you to improve. And I'm happy to revisit that and show you some of the improvements on internal linking. But now you don't really have to think about internal linking of improving internal linking of pages with 4 and 20 positions only. The approach to internal linking is it's slightly a little different, right? Like you can go to 4 and 20 positions, but I would take the data of impressions and clicks that you're getting as a better indicator of what's driving your traffic than 4 and 10, right? Because a keyword at 4 could give you, if the search volume for that keyword is only a few, then it's going to give you only 2 or 3. Versus a position on 20, it might be getting 10,000 impressions and more clicks, even though it's on 20th position, right? So you want to improve that first. So the approach to that is changing, right? Like, and that is why we made this adjustment to show this. And I'm happy to show this at the very end. Okay. All right, we have this. And now before I pass it off onto the researcher, right? Like, or the writer, I want to make sure that I do bare minimum and make sure that the content is at least at what it needs to be. So keywords and heading, missing common terms, not internal links. It's going to be the last part. My originality is great, but I can still fill in the gaps of originality, and which I can show you later on, right? So that you can start the process and go through the process of optimization. I'll just do the description and we'll quit because it might take a little longer and we're approaching session end. So I want to still show how you can add the gaps. Okay, so let's accept that. And then it goes to the heading and it'll go to the common terms and optimize everything. So you want to follow this process, optimize everything up till originality, right? Like up till common terms, right? And then when it comes to originality, let's go here. Like, say, okay, importance of hiring an SEO consultant. Okay, all right. So let's accept this. And originality. So let's look at some of the suggestions, right? And you will kind of get an idea of okay. So now let's see how we can enrich the content, right? Okay, what does an SEO consultant do? Include the statistics or data to back up the claim that hiring an SEO consultant leads to increased online visibility and credibility for your business. For example, you could mention the business that invested in SEO see this much amount of return, right? Like, so it's giving you an example. It's not telling you to include this. It's giving you an example of how you can bridge some quality gaps, right? Example or a case study of a successful SEO consulting project, right? Like you can get a screenshot from a different person explaining the importance of today's digital landscape, right? Like why? Because there's so many changes in SEO and your site could be affected, blah, 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 right? Like, so you can include some research around that, appealing diagram or infographic illustrating different areas of expertise responsible of SEO consultant, right? Like kind of having then a great idea of what an SEO, what the areas of SEO consultants you can focus on, right? Like, so you can use this as part of enriching your content and filling in the gaps of what really needs to be done in order to make the content sound not only engaging, interesting, and fact proof, right? Like it's packed with facts. So that's exactly what we do is and this gave me 100% originality. So there's not much I can do over here, but you can accept all of this answers and insert this into your content and then pass it on to your editor. or pass it on to the writer or researcher, right? And then they can go and source all of this information into the content. We have found that this leads to amazingly great content, just because there's so much details that they have to go and find, that by the time they start adding all of these details, your content is going to be so much interesting than it is right now. And it gives you suggestions for tables, right? Like case studies, reviews, and also like gathering facts or research from some places, right? Like all of that, it will suggest you for all of the sections that you're writing. And just following that will ensure that your content's like top notch. A ton of content I see being created by many really turns me off. Why? It reads sounds like a parent trying to explain the topic to a child, feeding information through wisdom straw. Lord, do you create personality and deliver a sense instead of fire hosing information at your reader? That's going to be preliminary to the thing, right? Like, and hence you don't want your draft to be written 5,000, 6,000 words. You want to start it as a benchmark that can guide towards creating this great content. There's still creativity left, information to be found and included in your content that makes it more interesting for the users, right? And hence we have generated this. And any of the suggestions that it is generating over here are not the things that AI can do at the moment. This is the information that you are going to have to source, include this as part of your content to enrich it. Making it people first and useful for search engines. Okay, so once you have done this, right, like you have the optimal score that you want, you can hand it off to the research section, right? Like they'll go and they'll figure it out and add any details that they need to in order to make this work. Just change it to publishing. You got it. Any more questions I can answer here? Happy to take it. We're at the 12, we're at the end of the session, but happy to take 5 more minutes of any questions or anything that people have questions around in outranking. We did have a lot of people join in after the session started. So the session will be posted on YouTube right after this. And you should have, oh, plagiarism checker is still there. See more? Go to plagiarism checker, start running. Absolutely. I'd also like to show you guys a style guide which you can use as some examples. Over here is a click and it gives you some examples. This extended example is not present on it, and I will add that to this later on how you can create style guides as well. There's plenty of specific style guides that you can use. I will add a style guide for our brand over here so you can follow it more closely. Yes, I will share all the documents and the presentation link will also be posted on under the video, right? So you guys will have access to all of these things. Okay, great. This is a great session. Some really good questions. If you guys have any questions, you can either send it to support or you can interact with us on the group. There is a new version of outranking with some improved bug fixes and some minor things that we didn't get time to publish, rolling out more everything else. I mean, everything that's rolling out is in strategist towards the end of the week. So you can expect a new video for strategist coming out next Monday or the coming Monday with ways of using outranking internal linking to improve your rankings. Sounds good. Thank you so much, guys, for coming, and have a great weekend. We'll see you guys in the group, and ciao.